Hi and welcome to this DCP web tutorial. In today's tutorial we'll be creating this Sci Fi Tunnel and particle animation. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up Blender. You should try and download and install the latest version. If you're not sure how to install Blender, I'll put a link in the YouTube description explaining how to go about installing the software. It's free to install, so go ahead and follow that tutorial. The first thing we'll do is click on General here, and we'll click on the cube and hit the delete key to delete that, and we'll click on this light source and also hit the delete key. So we're just left with the camera at the moment. Let's go to File, Save As. I've made a folder on my desktop. I'm just going to save this file and call it, let's call it Sci Fi. Just going to call it Sci-Fi Particles -01, and let's save this. And we're going to middle mouse click and rotate around so we've got the X and Y in this direction. We'll press Shift A and we're going to insert a cylinder. Now the cylinder, there's the properties options down here. So when we insert a cylinder, if we click here, we can see its properties, and the vertices we're going to set to 10. So this is going to have less sides on this particular cylinder. And we want to rotate this so that it's horizontal. So we can do that in two ways. Let's do it the simple way. So we can click here on the context menu and make sure the cylinder is selected, and we want to rotate on the Y axis. So here's our rotation, here's Y, and we just type in 90 and that will rotate it around. So now we've got this sitting down flat. We want to go into edit mode, so you can click here or press the tab key, and we want to select faces. So we want to select the faces on this object, so we need to select this option here, and we'll click on this face here. Hold down the middle mouse button and rotate to the other side. Hold down the shift key and left click on this side as well. So we're selecting both sides of these faces. Let's hit the delete key on our keyboard and select faces here. Now the tunnel is see-through, right? We can see right through this tunnel. Let's go back to object mode here, and what we want to do is just zoom out a little bit here so we can rotate our mouse wheel to zoom out, and we want to stretch this tunnel out. So to stretch it, we will want to stretch it on the, let's see, that's rotation, scale. So we're going to stretch it on the Z axis, and we're going to turn it in, we're going to set it to 30. So now we've got this long tunnel, right? We can see down this tunnel like this, for example. And the next thing we want to do is make a copy of this cylinder. So let's call this cylinder, let's call this tunnel tunnel main, right? So just double click and try and name your objects, because when you start to get a lot of different objects, it can be a little bit confusing which one you're clicking on. Let's call this tunnel main. We're going to duplicate this. So let's click on the tunnel, press shift key and D, and then hit the enter. So that will duplicate the tunnel and place it exactly in the same location. And this tunnel, we're not going to call it, we're going to rename it to tunnel segment, so tunnel SEG1. It's going to be called tunnel segment 1, and we want to now reduce the size of that tunnel or that segment, and we want to set it to 1 value here, not 30. We want to set it to 1. We should turn on our X-ray. X-ray allows us to see through the objects, to see other objects, right? So we can now see and select objects within other objects. That's all the X-ray will do. That's this option here, and make sure that your show overlays is turned on as well. Now what I find easier is to really what we want to do is move this object. So let's just move it first. So let's click on it, click on the tunnel segment, hold down the control key and click on the red arrow here, and then drag it all the way, and when you get to the end it should kind of snap right to the end there, right, perfectly to the end. That's with holding down the control key and using your red arrow to move it across, right? So let's do that one more time. So just hold down the control key, left click on that arrow and drag it all the way to the end. And if you really want, it's not an issue, but one thing I find easier to do is to place an empty object here or some other type of object that I want to rotate around. So sometimes when if you're trying to look through this tunnel and you're trying to work with this particular object at the end, really you're rotating around this point here, this central point here. There's a few options. You could either move the 3D cursor to that point there, but I like to kind of just create an empty. So here's an empty cube, and then just hold down the control key and drag that cube to the same location right here, and then we will just hide that empty. So this is called the empty. Let's hide it. We don't need to see it. We're going to press the letter N on our keyboard. N will open up the transformer tools here. Click view, and in the view options we'll go down to lock viewport. So lock this viewport to a specific object, and we'll lock it to the empty. So when we lock it to the empty, as we zoom in, we're really rotating around that invisible object, and now we can rotate inside the tunnel. We can see through it quite clearly, and we can manage or manipulate this object at the end much easier, right? You're going to find it a lot easier, and then we can undo this option here later. So let's press the letter N, and let's go to File, Save. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is start working on this front segment. So it's called Tunnel Segment 1. So sometimes when I'm working on objects, it's worth hiding other ones, so we just focus on this one object. So I'm going to hide the tunnel main and just focus on this Tunnel Segment 1. And at the moment it's very thin, right? It's got no thickness to it. So what we want to do is solidify. So let's go to the modifier, add modifier. So make sure tunnel 1 is selected. Go to modifier, add modifier, and then do solidify. And we'll set this to 0.1 and then click apply. And now it's got some nice thick edges to work with, right? And we're going to go into edit mode, and inside edit mode we need to make sure that the face select option is selected, and we need to turn off X-rays. So when we turn off X-rays, the object becomes solid in terms of the viewport, so we can't see through it, and we won't end up selecting like the faces on the outside by accident. So turn this off and on as and when you need it. And we're going to let's click on this one. So left click here, hold down the shift key, and select the other two here. So left click once here, hold down the shift key, and select these two with the left mouse button. Let's right click on them, and we're going to subdivide, and we subdivide this by 4. Set it to 4 here, and then we're going to click on the inset faces here. Inset faces, right? So click that, and then what we want to do is move our mouse cursor to like the top corner here, left click and drag in just a small amount. Can you see the small amount that I've dragged in? You can see like the little border around the edge. Then let go of the left mouse button and select individual here, and you'll get these little sort of segments out like this. And then we want to press S to scale. So press S, and then we want to, press S to scale, and then Z. So now you can start to play around with this these little panels. I'm going to press the escape key, and what we'll do is let's just align this a little bit better so we can see it. So what we'll do is press S to scale so we can scale it, and then sometimes it's worth moving your mouse cursor up here somewhere, then press S to scale and then Z, and then you can move it on smaller increments, and it's just a lot easier to control when your mouse cursor is a bit further away from the object. You can see I can control it much better now, right? So you can either have them like basically what's happening here is the ones on the outside edges, if you raise the mouse up, those will be extruded, and the ones on the floor will be indented. Or if you go the opposite direction, the ones on the floor will be extruded and the ones on the side will be indented, right? You can see that here as I'm moving it. So what I would do is I want the ones on the floor to be sticking out and the ones on the side to be indented like this, something like this around here. This is really your own choice what you prefer to do. You don't have to do exactly the same. Sometimes things are a little bit hard to see in this solid view like this, so what we can do is click on this drop down, click on matte cap, and that will give these this object a temporary material, just a made up material. And you can click here and you can pick these different lighting. So let's click on this one here, for example, this one, and now you can see clearly that these are indented and these ones are extruded, right? You can see that from here. I did these popping up like this, right? So I think that's okay. That looks good. Let's go to File, Save. Okay, so we're still in edit mode, and we want to now, let's just zoom out a little bit because we want to see these 4 sides here. So we're still in edit mode for this particular object. We've got the face select still selected. So let's click on that. Let's click on this face here, hold down the shift key, select this one, and then select the bottom one. You can select them in any order that you prefer, but that's kind of a good way to do it. Let's right click and then subdivide, and we subdivide this by 4. So we've got subdivision by 4, and then we're going to use the face, inset face again, and this time really this one's got the squares in it, right? So you can see clearly what's going on this side. So let's left click and drag in, and we want to drag in a small amount here, only a small amount, something like this. So you can see these faces have been inset like this, and then we can either extrude or we can push the faces inwards or outwards, right? So what we'll do is press let's just see, we will do, what we want to do is press S to scale and then Z, and then we can either manipulate them like this, so we can manipulate the size like this, or we can press S to scale and then Y. So I prefer S and Y, and I want to bring out the panels from the side like this. So all I'm doing is pressing the letter S to scale and then locking it on the Y axis, and then moving my mouse to the right hand side to almost extrude these sides out a little bit, right? Something like this I think will be good. Not too much, right? Something small like this. So now we can see these side panels being created. Now let's deal with the top section. So if we rotate and get our camera in a good view, or our viewport, we'll click here, hold down the shift key and select all of these. Let's go to File, Save, and let's right click here and subdivide as well. And this time we'll subdivide it by 4, and we've got a few different options here, but we're going to inset them as well. So let's click that, and then we'll drag just a tiny amount, something like this, a small amount like this. We don't want to set individuals, I don't think so. No, we don't want to do that. And we want to press S to scale, and then we want to press Z, right? So we can scale it like this, or we can press, we can hit the escape key if you don't like that. Remember, move your mouse cursor away from the object, somewhere down here. It makes life a lot easier. We'll press S to scale, and maybe you don't want to do an X, so S to scale and Y. Yeah, well, let's do that. So we'll press S to scale and then Y, and drag our mouse upwards, and we can bring in the roof sort of shape like this, maybe something like this. I think that would look pretty cool, right? Something like this. And you can play around with these panels, you can make more sort of variations of them. It's entirely up to you, but we're going to fly down this tunnel, right? So that was kind of the objective, to design something like this. Let's go to File, Save. Okay, so let's go back into object mode here, and we've got our kind of our first segment done. I'm going to create maybe one other variation of this segment, and then we'll use the Array Modifier to repeat them down this tunnel. So what we'll do is turn this one off, just hide it, and we turn back on our main tunnel. So we've got our main tunnel here, and what we want to do is make a copy of this as well. Let's just zoom out here, and we'll select it, press Shift and D, and then hit the Enter key. And this time, this main tunnel 001, we're going to rename it to SEG2, segment 2, right? SEG2. So we'll make a second segment here, and it's the same length as this big tunnel, so we want to change that and make it set to 1. Give it a 1 value on the Z axis, and then hold down the control key, make sure your move tool is selected, and just drag down to the end here like we did before. So we've hidden one of them just to work on this one, and then we'll move this one afterwards. So let's go ahead and hide the main tunnel, and then we can middle mouse click, and we can just zoom in on this particular segment of the tunnel. And let's what do we need to do first, right? We need to give it some thickness. So let's go to the modifier, add modifier, solidify, set it to 0.1. So there's our thickness, just like the other tunnel. Each segment will be the same thickness, but we can do a different sort of variation on that design, right? So let's go back into edit mode, and let's go to File, Save As, and let's save this as version 2. Okay, so with this new tunnel segment, let's go into edit mode. So make sure edit mode is selected here, and we want to select these 4 side faces here. So select this one, hold down the shift key, and then select all of these 4 sides here, and we'll right click and subdivide, and this time we want to subdivide it by 4 here, like this. and we're going to do something slightly different. So what we want to do now is left click on this one here, hold down the shift key and select all of them on that row. So you can see there's 2 segments above, 2 below, so we're selecting this middle segment, and do the same holding down the shift key. So always keep holding down the shift key so you can select all of these segments down the side here like this. Once they've all been selected, make sure the inset face is selected, and what we want to do is just left click here and drag it in so that we get this like thin sort of bar here, right? This little thin shaped bar here going across, and then we're going to press S to scale and then press Y, and we're going to drag outwards to something like, let's see, let's do S to scale and then Y. I want to drag it out. Let's zoom out a little bit. So S to scale and then Y. If you move something, you don't want to commit to that, you can left click and then it will select that particular. It will apply that particular update that you've just done, or you can press Control Z to undo that, right? So don't ever worry about that. You can always undo something. So let's press S and then Y, and then we'll drag out a little bit. We almost got like these little shelf things going down the side, something like around here. But really what we want to do is turn on our other tunnel segment, and let's just see what's going on here. So I think that's going to be fine. That should be okay, because these are gonna alternate down the tunnel anyway. So that should be fine. And what we will do is let's just go to File Save. It's always worth saving our work as we go along. Okay, so once you set these sides up, let's left click on this top section, hold down the shift key and select these 3 here. Right click and then subdivide, set that to 4 as well, and then we'll select the inset face and we'll drag in from this corner here to something like this. Doesn't have to be too much, somewhere around here, something like this, and then we can press S to scale and then use the let's do S and then press Y, and then you can scale it in like this. Maybe we'll do these ones a bit more narrow, something like this here, something like this, and then we'll click on these bottom ones, hold down the shift key, select them, let's right click, subdivide, set that to 4 as well, and then we'll use the inset and we'll drag from here just a small amount, just a tiny amount, and then we'll set these to individual, and then we'll press S to scale and then Z, and then we'll scale this to something like, let's see, maybe we'll scale it like this. This is entirely your choice how you want to scale these panels, right? So we've got 2 panels set up. Now let's go back into object mode. We've got this one here, and we've got the other variation. Let's turn that one on. You can see they're overlapping. We don't really want that, so let's turn on our main tunnel. Let's turn on segment 1 and let's click on segment 2. So segment 1 and 2 sit right on top of each other. So we want to hold the control key, select segment 2, hold the control key and drag it back so that it's exactly one section away from segment 1. Now when you look down the tunnel, you'll see they're going to alternate, right? It'll be like segment 1 and segment 2 like this. So let's use the array modifier to replicate these tunnel segments all the way down to the end of the tunnel. So let's click on this first one, segment tunnel 1. Let's go to the modifier, add modifier, array modifier, and let's set the relative offset here to 0. I believe we'll set this bottom one to 1, and that will move it 1 segment down, but we don't want that. We want to move it 2 segments down, so set it to 2. So it'll be every other segment will be this first segment. If we zoom out, you can see we've got a gap in the middle, but that's where our second one will run from. So if we zoom right out with our mouse and then just set the count all the way down to the end, let's do 1 less than that, I think, up to here, and then we can select the second segment. So let's go ahead and select the second tunnel segment, go to the array modifier, select array, go to add modifier, select array, and we'll set this one to 0 here as well, and the offset, we want to set this to 2 as well. So now it's going to increment every other one, right? And we'll set these values all the way up to complete it right to the end here. So if we press if we middle mouse click and get back and look down the tunnel, now we can see the tunnel's been built with this array modifier. So we can click apply here to the array modifier, and we can click on the first segment and click apply as well. And what we can do sometimes is just worth temporarily turning off the overlays, just so that you can look down the tunnel and you can see what's going on in here. And I think that's going to be okay. Again, you can experiment with these panels. You know how to offset them, you know how to extrude them, you know how to create the segments. You can create your own variation of this. You don't have to do what I've done. You don't have to make these little shelf things down the side. You can do whatever you want, right? It's entirely your choice, now that you know how to do that. But the nice thing that we can do is click on, say, let's turn our overlays back on. If we were to click on segment 2, the second tunnel segment, press R to rotate, and then Z up, no, not Z, R to rotate, then X, we can rotate this whole segment now. So as we're flying down this tunnel, you could rotate this segment, so every other one will be rotating. You can do loads of pretty cool stuff now, right? So let's go to File, Save As, and we'll save this as version 3. Okay, so now we should probably add some lighting and some materials to our tunnel. So the first thing we should do is really add some lighting. So let's press Shift A. So select inside of here, anywhere, select inside, just click, press Shift A, and we're going to insert a light, which will be an area light. So area light is going to be stretched, right? So let's middle mouse click and let's get to the top here where we can see this area light. So when I roll over it, you'll see the area light in here. Let's turn back on our X-ray so we can see this faint orange box, which is the area light. You can just about see it probably on my screen here. You can see that here, and we want to scale it. I just want to make sure we scale it on the right axis. So that's going out wide. We don't want that. So we want to scale it on X-axis, and I believe we want to scale it to 60. So 60 should be from the beginning to the end here. Right, 60, set it to 60 value on the X, and then we can click it, and we actually want to reduce its width, right? So the width will be on the Y axis. So let's reduce that down to something like 0.04. We don't want it to be too wide, and we're going to drag this up so that it's above like where the ceiling is, right? Somewhere up here. We can probably get it a little bit higher. Something around here should be good. Something like this. And then let's go to our render view. So inside our render view, we want to give that light some power. Let's set it to like 150. Now you can start to see the light in the tunnel. So let's set this to 1500, and now you can see much more light. So we can experiment with the light and get that just the way that we want it. Probably around 800 will be good. We don't need it too bright. We want to be like a kind of a dark tunnel, flying down this dark tunnel. Something like this, I think maybe a bit brighter. Let's say it's around 1100. Something like this should be good. I think that's going to be pretty good. Let's go to File, Save, and now we want to try and add some materials, right? So let's click on Set Tunnel Segment 1. Here, let's go to the material here, and let's click New, and then double click on Tunnel Segment 1. Select this text here, copy it, and then in this where it says material here, paste that name, that label. It's worth labeling your materials the same as what the object you're labeling it to. It just makes life a lot easier when you're looking for it later. We're going to set this to metallic, so let's set it all the way up to metallic. We want to bring down the roughness a little bit, set it to like 0.3, something like this, and then you can change the color in here. Where is it? Yeah, the base color. You can make it darker, you can make it lighter. This is where you can start to experiment with the different shades. You can change the color, you can make it like a blue or purple. This is really down for you to now go and experiment with, right? I want kind of like a blue, sort of metal blue sort of color, right? So something not too, something around, again, it's down to preferences really, isn't it? So I'll stick with this color, and we can easily adjust it later. So if we don't like that particular color, we can adjust it quite quickly afterwards, right? And let's click on Tunnel Segment 2. This is the second segment, and we will click on material here. Let's double click, copy this name, click new material. Where it says material here, press Ctrl V and hit enter, so you label that material correctly. And we want to make that metallic as well, and bring down its roughness a bit. Let's set that to 0.3 as well, same as the other one. And we want to change its color. So here again, it's down to your own preference. You could match it exactly the same color as the previous material, but this is again your choice. What I might do is stick with like a sort of dark grey sort of color, something like this. Sometimes it's worth just turning off the overlays. You can see what it looks like. If you're happy with it, great. If you're not, you're free to adjust it as much as you like, and chop and change it as much as you like. Let's go to the context render here, right? Okay, so I made a few slight changes to the color scheme that I was using. Didn't quite like the previous colors, but I think these ones are going to be okay. So you can just click on tunnel 1 or tunnel 2 and just adjust the base color, right? Pick whatever color you want, make sure metallic set to 1 and the roughness set to like 0.3, and then just play around with the colors. Maybe segment 2 could be a bit lighter, darker, whatever you kind of choose. It's entirely your choice. So we was on this context render here, and what I'll do is in the render here I'm going to set it to 128, and in the viewport I'll set it to 96, and then I'm going to turn on the bloom, so that gives a little bit of glow around the edge, and we're going to need that a little bit later. And we'll turn on screen space reflections. Now you can see how we're casting shadows and how all of this lighting is now reflecting because of this the metallic of this material, right? And in volumetrics we want to set the samples to 2, and then set the sample rate here to 128, so that should be okay. And then in screen space reflections here, I normally turn off half trace, and then the trace position, set it all the way to the top, and then the max roughness is really down to you. Now you can choose what you think looks pretty good. Normally I just crank this to the top, and then you'll get like some really nice smooth shades, but it really depends on your machine. Can it cope with those particular settings, right? And then the thickness here, you can start playing around with these settings and see how they affect like the shadows and the way that these shadows are being casted on these different objects. So I'll leave you to go and experiment with these settings here. The bloom, you can change its intensity. We'll probably see more of this in action in a moment when we add some lighting, some more lighting to this scene. So let's just turn off the area light for the moment. If we turn it off and turn it on, you can see the difference it's going to make, because it's that light there that we put across the top that's going to really create this scene. And then we can go and click on the area light itself, click on the options here for the area light, and we can change its color, and that's going to change dramatically this tunnel as well. So you can go and experiment. You can make like this really like dark red tunnel. I think that looks pretty cool actually. We may stick with something like that. And then the power of this light is going to affect this tunnel as well. So if you want it quite dark, you can have it much lighter. It's really down to your own preferences now, right? There's no right or wrong here, so it's what you like is what is going to work. So let's set this back to 1100, and I think this is looking pretty good. And what I want to do is add a another sort of light source, but it will be more of a let's try it anyway. So let's press Shift A. Let's click inside here, press Shift A, and we're going to go to Mesh and then Cube. So we've got a cube in here now, and what we want to do is resize that. But let's bring that. In fact, let's leave the cube where it is. Let's go to wireframe and let's middle mouse click. Let's just get to that square object here. So you can just about see that square object here, right? Here it is, this square here. And let's click on the cube, and we want to scale it. So let's go to the settings here and scale it down on the, we don't really want to scale it on the width, we want to scale it on the y-axis. We want to make it more narrow because it's too sometimes what's worth doing here is pressing the letter N, and instead of rotating around that empty, we could rotate around this cube. So if we rotate around the cube, let's get to the cube, here it is. It will make it much easier to model this by rotating around it. So let's try and go to solid view. We should be able to see that cube a bit better, right? Here it is right here. And maybe, yeah, we need to leave our x-ray on. So we can even zoom inside here and see the cube right inside like this. See it inside. So this is the cube, and we've scaled it on the Y. So we want to scale it to 0.25 and then scale it on the x-axis right down to around 0.05, and then we're going to drag it up so it's almost like a part of this this roof here, right? Let's see. Let's drag it up a bit more. I think the width is just about right. I think that's pretty good. I think that's going to be pretty good position for it. So you can see, just about probably see that here. And what we want to do now is increase its width. So I believe, let's just zoom in here. Let's have a look. So we want to scale it on the x-axis. It should be 60. We should have to type 60 value in here. And I think that's gone way too much. So let's set it to 30. And that should be correct now, 30. Let's see. Okay, probably wise would be to set this back to the empty. So we're rotating around the empty. And let's just go in here. So the empty is over here. And we can see the edges flush up here. So let's go back to our render view. Let's click on this where is it? This cube. So select this cube, and we should turn back on our overlays, right? Turn on our overlays so we can see what's going on. And we want to go to material, new material, and let's label this cube top light. Let's call it top light, and then in the material here, let's call that top light, and then set it to a emission shader, and let's increase its power to like 4, something like 4. And what we need to do is click on the area light. We need to bring that down a bit. I think yeah, that it's been like buried in this cube, so I want to bring it below the cube. If I move it right at the scene, you'll see what the colors look like. As I bring it back in, those reds and oranges, well, those purples and stuff will start to show through again. And now we've got much better lighting in here. You can experiment with this top light here. It doesn't have to be that color. You can pick other colors as well. Now you can really start to have a bit of fun, right? So maybe like a blue would be pretty good. And then maybe in this area light, this red isn't quite right. So maybe we'll change it to, let's see. It's really down to your own preference. So I think maybe we'll stick with like blues. Something like this. Let's go to File, Save As, and save it as version 4. Okay, so I think it'd be wise for us to set our camera up just looking down this tunnel for now. So let's press the letter N on our keyboard. That will close down this panel on the side, and then let's kind of center out our tunnel here, then press Ctrl-Alt-0. So this is the camera, this is what the camera can see. It's a bit offset, so let's go ahead and click on let's see, let's click on the context here for the object, this camera. Let's click on the camera itself, and let's set the Y location to 0, so that will put the camera in the center. Then we can move that camera up a bit, right? It's a bit too low, and then we want to bring it back to the beginning of this tunnel, right around here. Now remember, whatever's in this box is what's going to get seen, not all this stuff on the outside. So let's raise this up a little bit, maybe to about here, and bring it forward a little bit. And let's set the focal length to 35mm. That will just widen things out a bit. and we need to move it forward a bit more now to around here, something like this. Let's press F12. Let's just see what we see. So now you can see what that scene is going to look like. We might bring that camera down actually. It's pretty high up, right? So let's see. So let's, on the y-axis, let's bring it down. And let's see these rotations. This Y rotation, set it to 0. And this is Z rotation. We'll just leave that at 90. And then maybe we'll rotate the camera up slightly to around 83 degrees. So it's looking up slightly down this tunnel. And I think that's gonna be good. I think that sort of angle. But you can experiment with the angle, press F12 to render it, and you can see what it looks like. One thing we want to do is go to the world settings. Sometimes it's worth doing this now. Let's just do it now. Let's click on this background and set it to black, because when we look down the tunnel, at the end of the tunnel we want it to be black. We're going to fly through the end part here, and then we're going to do these particles afterwards, right? So let's sort out some material. Let's improve this material. I think we can make some improvements to it, so let's do that now. Okay, so let's click on this tunnel segment 1. And let's go over to the shading here, and in this viewport at the top here you want to press the number 0, and that will show you what the camera can see, right? So we're looking down through the camera lens now, you can think of it that way. And make sure object is selected here in this drop down, object, and make sure tunnel 1 segment is selected. You can you can turn off or turn on the overlays. I'll leave them off for now, but make sure that you're in the render view, right here, render view, because that's what you want to see, the render. If I zoom out a little bit here, we'll see the output settings here and the principal shader here. I'm going to zoom in towards the bottom and press Shift A, and I want to insert a bump map. So let's go to vector, bump here, and then connect the normal to the normal here, and then press Shift A, and I'm going to insert a texture, and I want a Musgrave texture here. I'm just going to connect the color to the height here. That is pretty much all I'm going to do. You can experiment with these. I would advise you go and experiment with these 2 top settings and these settings here. So you can change the strength, and that's going to affect this. But I kind of like it pretty much as default, just as it is. You can experiment with this and maybe change the way it looks. This looks pretty cool as well, with these like little lights coming down the side here. And this is like the texture affecting the image, right? So we press F12. We can render out and we can see what it looks like. Now it's looking a lot more sci-fi, right? So let's close this. Let's go to File, Save As, and we'll save this as version 5. Okay, so we've applied a texture to this first segment. So let's apply one to the second segment. So let's click on segment 2, tunnel segment 2. And what we want to do is press Shift A, and we'll insert another bump map here, and connect the normal to the normal here, and then we'll press Shift A, and we want to insert a texture which will be a checker texture here, and connect the color to the height here, and set the scale to 14. Let's just see if that works out right. So what this scale here, really what I'm trying to do, you can like scale this up quite a lot, but really what I want is let's set it to here. So on 36 you can see there's a line that goes down the middle, right here, this line here. So what value you set it to, you can set it to quite a high value. 36 is right now. If you set it to 14 you'll still see that line, but you'll see less of them, those segments being created. So maybe 36, 64 should work as well. So 64, so you're just multiplying by you know, just doubling up the numbers basically. 32 will work as well. It depends on how much detail you want in there. So you can see 128 should be even more detail in these panels down the side, but I think that's overkill. So really what we want is something around 32, which I think looks pretty cool. That looks okay, or even 14 I think looks fine as well, where it looks like it's got these panels being created out of these side sections here. So I quite like that. Let's press F12 to render and see what it looks like, and I think that's looking pretty good. That is pretty much our tunnel done. We just need to fly down this tunnel now, get out to the other end, and then create some particle effects, and then maybe we do something with some text. We can experiment. once we get to the other end of the tunnel. So we're just going to fly a camera through. I think this looks pretty cool. Don't know what you think, but it looks very sci-fi to me. And let's see what we can do in the next part of this video. Okay, so let's go back into our layout view. So let's click layout here. Let's click on the, in fact, we'll stick with the solid view for the moment. So select solid view and we'll turn off the, we'll leave on show X-rays for that actually. Let's middle mouse click and rotate out so we can see our object here. And our camera is right down at this end and we want to fly through the tunnel and then display something at this side, right? So let's press Shift A and insert a Ico Sphere. So here's an Ico Sphere. We're going to hold down the control key and then click on this red arrow to drag it out. And we're going to drag it out probably, let's see, something like around here. It's almost like 1, 2, 3 of these big sections away from the end of the tunnel, like around here. And let's just see. Really what we want to do is rotate around this object now. So let's press N on our keyboard and then we don't want to rotate around the empty, we want to click here and rotate around that Ico Sphere. So now when we rotate around it, if we zoom out, let's just get to it. It's over here. So let's rotate around that object. And what might be worth checking is if we press 0, that's what our camera sees, right? And sometimes it's worth let's press N on our keyboard. Let's just close that panel down. We can see the Ico Sphere here, and I think the size is going to be about right. This probably the size it is right now is pretty good. So let's just move back to the Ico Sphere. Just middle mouse click and it will come back to here. And let's see. So maybe we'll make it a bit bigger actually. So let's click on it. We'll press S to scale and we'll hold down the control key and we're going to scale it to twice its size. So all of these are set to 2 here, you see. And we want to go into edit mode. So let's go into edit mode. So now we're in edit mode and we want to use the inset face. So we're going to zoom right in and on one of these corners here, we're going to left click and drag towards the center point here. Just a small amount, but let's turn off the X-ray. Let's turn it off for a moment. So we'll click here and drag in just a small amount to about here, something like this, and then let go of the mouse button and we'll set individuals here, set it to individuals. So you've got these little segments now, and then we're going to let's see, we're going to press S to scale and we're going to scale it inwards. In fact, let's press escape, move your mouse cursor away up here somewhere and then press S to scale and you can scale it in a bit more accurately, let's say something like this. So now we've got this sort of sci-fi type shape object, right? And what we want to do now is go back to object mode and we're going to click on this object and press Shift and D to duplicate and hit enter, and then we want to scale this one to be bigger than the one that's going to be inside. So let's press S to scale. Let's move our mouse cursor to around here, press S to scale, hold down the control key and we're going to scale it to 2 point, let's set it to around 3 should be good. You can see it's 3 here, right? We can adjust that afterwards. So we've got Ico Sphere. Let's call this Ico Sphere in SIDE, inside, and we've got Ico Sphere, and let's call this one OUTSID, outside. So we've got the outside and the inside. Let's hide the outside one. Let's think about this. In fact, let's enable the outside one. Let's click on it. So we'll select the outside one and we'll go to our modifier, add modifier, and we want to set it to a wireframe. Now we've got this wireframe with this other sphere inside, and we'll set its thickness to around 0.3 and click apply. So now we've got these two objects embedded. You can turn off the overlays to see that a bit more clearly, what's going on here, right? Now what we want to do is set some colors for these. So I think what we'll do is click on the inside one, go to our in fact what we'll do is click on the material, let's double click here, copy this name, click new material, paste that material into here, or paste that name into here, and then click here and select emission, and we'll set this to 4. Let's set it to 4, and let's go to our look dev view here. We can see this sphere now being illuminated, right? Really, let's try and bring that down a bit. This is kind of optional whether you make it an emission shader or not. Really, if it was a emission shader, we didn't need to do those indentations. So you can set this to something like the principal shader, and then you can set it to something like a metallic or something like this. But I want it to kind of illuminate inside. So really, that first sort of cutout thing we did, we didn't really need to do that, but it's fine, it doesn't matter. Now we've got options to experiment with this, right? So let's set it back to an emission shader, and we'll give it to the value of 4, and then we'll click on the outside Ico Sphere. Let's double click in here, copy this name, press Ctrl C to copy. Let's create a new material, let's paste that here, and we will set the metallic all the way up and set the roughness down to around 0.3, something like 0.3 right here. And then in the base color, I want to make it like almost like a shade of blue, something like this. And then if we go to our render view, we can see what that looks like now in our render view. And if let's press 0 on our keyboard. So when we press 0 on our keyboard, that takes us back to the camera view. We can see that object in the far distance now, right? But what I want to do is have this tunnel draw, almost like draw out as we're flying through it. I want it to almost build in front of us, and then when we get to that object, it will kind of fade in rather than just being like a white sort of thing in the background here. So to do that, let's click on the camera, and we want to set the end clipping here. So let's reduce that down to, I reckon, about 20. So you can see the tunnel isn't fully built now. It's like as we fly through it, it's going to get built. So we can kind of simulate that before we animate our camera. Let's save this. Let's go to File, Save As, and save it as version 6. And if we were to click on the camera and go to the object data here, on this x-axis, we can move the camera backwards and forwards, right? So we could even have the camera like all the way onto a black frame, and then we can start flying towards this tunnel, get to the tunnel as it's being built, and then you can see the tunnel being built in front of you as you're flying through it, and it will get to the end, and then it's going to go to black again. You can see it's black here, but then as we fly more forwards, we might bring those Ico spheres a bit closer. In fact, what we'll do, let's see, in fact, let's fly forward. Here we can see it being built here now, right? Like this. So it's going to fade in with this sort of effect. So maybe we could possibly bring that. I think it'll be okay actually. It's not that far away. It just seems far. So that's going to look pretty cool, I think. But we need to probably either move this Ico Sphere or move the camera. So probably we will, I think it'd be wise for us to move the camera. So when we get to this black frame here, we might move the camera up a little bit so this Ico Sphere kind of appears towards the center of the screen, something like this, and then we can work with our particles afterwards and do some particle effects, and maybe we do something with some text, right? So let's move our camera all the way back to the beginning, and I'm kind of 50-50 whether we start in the tunnel or start outside. So there's a couple of options there, right? So we'll leave it at the beginning of the tunnel for now, and then we'll work out whether we start on the outside or the inside of the tunnel. Let's go to File, Save. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our particle emitter, and I think the easy way for us to do this, let's just middle mouse click so we're rotating back around this this Ico Sphere here. We can see the tunnel exit right here. Let's rotate around so that tunnel exit is behind us. We zoom out a little bit, try and get this, if you can, it's not really necessary, but it would be wise for us to try and get this tunnel exit in the same sort of path as this Ico Sphere. Then we can zoom in on it and we rotate down a little bit here. So what we want to do is emit particles from this blue sort of object that's surrounding this Ico Sphere in the middle. So we want to click on this Ico Sphere, Move our mouse cursor into the middle of the screen and press Ctrl D to duplicate and hit enter. So now we've got two copies in exactly the same place, but this one we're going to rename it to Ico Sphere emitter. It's going to make this the emitter, and what we want to do is go to the particle system here and click new, and we will call this Ico Sphere emitter and set the numbers to 5000. And let's just click play and see if we, so right now we don't see anything, we don't see any particles. That's because our overlay has been turned off. So if we click show overlay, we can see the particles being emitted now. And if we were to press F12 and render, we won't actually see the particles. We can't really see them because the camera is not far enough anyway, but you wouldn't actually see these in the render. So we have to create some separate objects that will be emitted and used as the particles, right? So to do that, what we should really do first of all is go to our let's go to our field weights here and set the gravity to 0. The reason why I want to do that is I don't want the particles to drop down. I want them to kind of float away, and we're going to spin this object and these particles are going to be floating off of this object, something like this. Now what do we need to we need to create some particles, right? So what we will do, let's just zoom out a little bit here and we'll press Shift A and let's go to our solid view, or we can go to look dev view, is fine as well, just so that we can see things a bit more clearly in here. Let's press Shift A and insert a UV sphere. So we've got a UV sphere here, and let's drag that towards this Ico Sphere, so when we rotate around we'll be able to see both these objects side by side, something like this. Let's just drag this one to the side and we will click on it, select it, press Shift and D and then hit enter, so that will duplicate it, and let's drag that one to one side. So now we've got two of these Ico Spheres. Let's click on them. We could shade them smooth. I kind of like the panels on this because everything's got kind of like these rigid sort of shapes and stuff, so I think we'll leave it like this, or we can experiment with it. And what we want to do is go to this scene collection up here, right click on it and click new. So this scene collection text, right click, click new. It's going to create a new collection here. Let's double click and label that as particles like this, and drag this, let's call this particle 1, and then the other Ico Sphere, or the other sphere here, let's label that particle 2. We've got particles 1 and 2 here, which are these two here. Let's select both of them. So select the first one, hold down the Shift key, click on the second one, and drag and drop them into this collection here, because we're going to isolate this collection and use that as the part of the emitter here, right? So let's click on this first one and go to the, let's double click on the name, particle 1. Let's double click on this, actually this one here. So double click in here, select this text, copy it, go to the material and click new, and then paste that name into here and then hit enter, and go to the shader and select emission and set this to 4, something like 4. It's going to glow, these particles are going to glow. We'll click on this one, and which is particle number 2, click new, paste in the particle 1 text but change it to 2 because it's the second particle, and we'll click here and go to the emission shader, and we're going to set this one to sort of a turquoisey sort of blue, and then set that to, I think the other one was 4, right? Yeah, both of them are now set to 4 and they're going to glow like this. Let's zoom out a little bit, let's zoom out quite a bit and select both these particles, select particle 1 and 2 and drag them off to the side over here somewhere. We don't want them in the camera view, right? And what we'll do now is click on our emitter. So here's the Ico Sphere emitter, and here is the particle settings that we created before. Set it to 5000. We're going to have to adjust this a little bit as well afterwards, but we'll worry about that in a moment. For now, we need to go to render, and in Halo we need to select collection here, and then in instance collection select particles. And if we go back and then go to our render view, we can turn off the overlays and click play, and now we see those particles flowing out like this. So we want to rotate this Ico Sphere, And what we would do is, let's see, in theory, we don't need this Ico outside one. We could adjust this one. Let's have a think about it, right? So let's work with this emitter first. Let's set up these particles properly. They're a bit too big for me, so let's reduce their size to something like 0.02. I kind of like this sort of size. Let's set them to random scale. So some will be tiny, some will be a bit bigger, and we'll have this sort of effect going on here. And let's see, we want to pick random colors as well. So now there'll be some randomization of the whites and blues for this Ico Sphere. And as we move the camera towards it, we want this to rotate and these particles to be emitted. And then I'm kind of 50-50 whether we do anything with some text or something. Probably we should do something like that. We'll think about that in a moment. I'm not quite convinced of this white object in the middle here. So maybe what we would do, let's have a little, let's try something, right? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We can always, let's go. Normally when you experiment, it's worth going to file save, then file save as, and save it as a next version, because if the next thing you do, if it doesn't work out right, you've always got version 6 to go back to where you was pretty much happy with how things were, right? So we'll call this version 7. This is like our experimental version. And what I wanted to try and do here is this outside Ico Sphere. Really, the inside, well, the emitter and this outside one are behaving the same because the show emitter has been enabled, right? So it would be worth taking this outside one, pressing S to scale, hold down the control key, and maybe we can scale that one out a bit more, like this. So now we've got two sort of these like frames or whatever you want to call them, and maybe we'll rotate them in different directions. Maybe that will look quite cool where we can have them rotating in different directions. The inside one will emit the particles and the outside one will just rotate, right? So what we'll do is maybe if we set this outside one to an emission shader, that might look quite cool because it would be like this emission shader sitting on the outside. So to do that, what we need to do is click on the material. There's the material down here, and we need to click this minus sign. We don't want to delete this material. We want to keep that for the inside Ico Sphere. So let's delete that material temporarily, or just click this minus to remove it, and we'll click. Let's go to Ico Sphere outside, right? Let's click new. Let's call it Ico Sphere outside 02. So this will be like a second shader, a different one. And let's try and set that to an emission shader. Let's see what that looks like. If we don't like it, we can always get rid of it. I don't think that's looking right, you know. That doesn't work for me. So let's set it to a principal shader, and then maybe we'll make it metallic. Let's bring down its roughness. We can even maybe increase the roughness. Let's see. Let's set it to 0.3 again, or let's set it to 0.35, something slightly different. Maybe we can change its color. Let's see. Maybe we'll go for like a purple in there or something. Something like this. I'm not quite, I don't know about this middle, this inside one. Maybe we need to change its color. I kind of like the, maybe we need to power it up more. So let's go back and press play. Let's see this inside one, let's hide it. So if we hide it, we don't really see much here going on here with this this Ico Sphere. So that light source is quite important to illuminate this object, right? think we're gonna have to leave it like this. I think that should be okay. Let's go to File, Save. This is our version 7. We can always revert back to version 6 if need be. Now what we want to do is start our animation, right? For our camera. So let's press 0. This is where our camera is right now, and we need to decide whether we work from the beginning of this tunnel or we fly into the tunnel from outside. I kind of like the idea of flying into the tunnel. Let's go to the camera. Let's bring it back. Maybe even have it where it's like a black frame, and then this stuff starts to show through, right? So maybe we set it to around here. So I'm setting it to like minus 50. Let's call it minus 51, right? Minus 51. That's the distance away from that center point, right? And then as we move forward, it will start to show. So let's set it to minus 51. And what we want to do is be on frame 1 here. Let's go to File, Save. Let's go to our output settings and set the frame rate to 30 frames a second. I think will be good. And we've got 250 frames at the moment. So at 30 frames, 250. Let's do that maths. So it should. Let's see. It's too late for me to do maths. It says 8.3 seconds, right? So really we should set this to around 300 frames. That would be a 10-second duration. If we zoom out here, use our mouse wheel to zoom out, we can see the first frame and the end frame here for now. And really that tunnel section probably no more than 3 seconds, right? So 90 frames. So what we'll do is hit the record button, move over, click on the camera, move over to the let's go to the camera settings here. Where is the object settings here for the camera, and press I here, the letter I, and also on the rotation as well. So we'll insert keyframes for those. Let's move to frame 90. So left click here, drag it to frame 90, and then all we got to do is move this forward. Just move it forward to where we want to get the camera to. So I reckon, let's see. So I reckon we should, can you see these little blue lines down the side here? We just want to move, in fact this is what the camera can see, so that's probably going to be okay, but we'll move it slightly more forward so those are at the frame. And then let's call that 29, and then from 90 to let's say it's a second, let's say maybe, yeah, let's call it a second, maybe 2 seconds, 120, 150. Let's set it to around frame 150 here, and we'll move, let's press the letter I. So we insert a keyframe, and we're going to move the camera forward. It's not going to need to move that far, right? To here, like around here, right here. And we want to move the camera down so this object's towards the center, so that will be on our z-axis. Let's move the camera down to around here. So let's just check that. We can left click here. I think that's going to be pretty cool. So let's go to File, Save As, and save it as version 8. And let's untick the record button and click play. So we've got a bit of a problem here, right? What we need to do is on this frame 90, let's hit the record button. Let's go to the first frame, and on the first frame, let's copy this value here. So just right click, just left click inside and press Control C to copy. Go to this frame 90. So let's just right click on, 1 minute, let's left click here on frame 90 and hit the record, make sure the record button is on, and set this Z to this same value. Just cut and paste it in here, because at the moment from this frame to this frame the camera is moving upwards. We don't want that. We want it to be like straight through this tunnel, and as it gets towards the end, then it will do the movement to bring this into focus, right? So there's a slight error there, but it should be fine. Let's click play. Okay, let's pause on this frame here. Let's render it out and see what it looks like from here. So everything looks nice and clean. It's looking pretty good. Let's get to frame 150. So the particles are already being emitted at frame 150, or they already started all the way back from frame 0. So we don't want that. We want them to start emitting as and when this object gets shown, and we want this these surrounding frames to this sort of frame sort of stuff to be how can I say, rotating. So we turn off the record button. Let's go to file, save. Okay, so on frame 150, that's pretty much where our camera stops moving, right? Here on 150. So when it gets to this 150, we want our particles to start emitting. Let's click on the Ico Sphere emitter here, and we'll go to the particle system, and we'll set the start frame to 150. So now the particles won't start emitting until that particular frame, and duration 200 might be okay. We'll have to play around with this, and we want to leave the lifetime. Maybe we should set some randomness to this lifetime. Let's set a little bit, right? Something like 0.3, 0.3. We'll see how that plays out. So some of them will live a little bit longer than others, but we can probably extend that a little bit. So on frame 150, our camera stops moving, and what we want to do before that, before frame 150, we actually want to have this sphere, the emitter, rotating. So the Ico Sphere emitter is the inside one, and then there's one sitting on the outside. So the inside one I want to rotate, and I want to rotate that as this object is coming inwards. So we'll start that on probably frame 120. So let's hit the record button. Let's click on the Ico Sphere emitter, and we can zoom in here a bit. Let's middle mouse click, zoom in here, and we want to go to the object data here, and on the rotation only, we'll press the letter I, and we'll go to now frame, let's see, I think 280, frame 280, and press the letter I on rotation as well. And we want to rotate it on the z-axis 720 degrees, so it's going to spin around twice in that duration. Let's just see if that's overkill. Let's click play. I think that's okay. I think that rotation is okay. So let's go back to frame 120. Let's click on the outside one, outside Ico Sphere, and let's go to the rotation and press the letter I, and then we'll go to frame, I think it was 280, right? Let's just double check. Emitter 280. Let's go back to the outside one, 280, press the letter I, and now we do minus 720. So it's going to rotate in the opposite direction, like this. And the particles are going to be emitted. Let's try, let's click on this inside Ico Sphere. Let's go to its material. Let's bring down maybe its brightness. Let's see what it looks like with it off. This looks pretty cool actually, like this. Because there's no light source, maybe what we'll do, let's try one thing. I don't know if it will work, but sometimes we've got to experiment a little bit. What we'll do is we'll go to like frame 220, that should be fine, something like 220. What we will do, let's go into our solid view so we can see things a bit easier. Let's zoom out here, and let's try one thing here. Don't know if this will work, but we'll try. I think it might look cool actually. So let's press Shift A, and let's insert a spotlight. So we've got a spotlight here. Let's hold down the control key and then click on the red arrow. drag this. Let's drag this spotlight. So it's almost in the center of this object, this spotlight. Let's drag it down. Let's see, are we dragging the spotlight here? We are. Let's turn on our overlays. Okay, so we've got a bit of a problem in here. This spotlight is sitting in the particles, so we need to drag it out of the particles and drag it into the top collection. Make sure it sits in this top collection, not in the particles collection here, right? We don't want it there. So let's click it, drag it into this top collection here, and we want to rotate it. You can see if we zoom out a bit. Let's zoom out. Let's get out here. We want to rotate this so it's facing upwards. So let's click on our object data. Let's turn off the record button. Make sure the record button is off when you're not using it. And we need to work out, we need to rotate this on the, I think it's on the x-axis, right? So let's rotate this 180. Let's drag it down a little bit. Let's drag it. Let's try and get this to drag down. So maybe here, something like this. And let's turn on the power. Let's set that to something silly like 900. And let's go into our render view. Let's press 0 so we can see what the camera sees again. This is what the camera can see now, right? And this spotlight is illuminating this object rather than using that Ico Sphere in the middle. So that inside Ico Sphere, the inside one, maybe now we can go back to its material and we turn the strength right off, right? So maybe what we'll do is set this one to a principal shader now, and let's see, let's turn the metallic up. It's still quite hard to see, so let's just turn off our overlays. I'm not sure if we really need that inside one. I don't think it's adding much to this. It's a bit too busy, so let's turn that inside one off. Well, I don't think we need it. I think this looks pretty good. So let's just see, and let's go to our, where is it gone? Spotlight. Let's increase its power. The more we increase it, in theory, we should be able to see more of this object being illuminated. So let's set it to let's just make sure this is being done right. Doesn't seem to be affecting it. We need to bring it in closer to the object. It's too far away maybe. Let's see, let's press 0 and let's turn on our overlays. Where is this spotlight? Here it is. I think it's facing the wrong direction. That's why it's facing downwards. You can see it's facing downwards. I'm sure we rotated it, but maybe I was wrong. We need to rotate it around the other way, so it needs to be facing upwards. That's why it's not really illuminating. But if we set this, turn it off, you can see. So let's set this to 900. I guess we could illuminate it from the top, but I wanted to have it from bottom upwards. That was the objective. So let's drag this down. Let's go back to the overlay here, or the object data here, and on the X we want to rotate it 180. I'm sure we did that, but maybe we undid that by accident. And then we should be able to drag this down or up. Let's drag it down a bit. Then press 0. Now we can see this is being illuminated by this. We want to narrow this down a bit, right? Let's see. Let's middle mouse click. And let's go to its size here. So let's narrow that down a bit. I think this should be okay. Let's try one other thing. Let's press 0 on our keyboard. Let's go into our shader and let's go into the world settings. Let's look at the render view and press 0 on our keyboard so we can see this object here. I'm not sure if this will work, but let's try. Let's zoom out a little bit here and let's press Shift A and add a volume scatter in here, and we'll connect that to the volume here. We set the density to 0.015 and let's set the option down here to around 0.700, around that sort of number. Let's see, we've got like this faded volumetric lighting now. Let's click on here and let's set this to like quite a high number, something like this. Maybe we can change its color to purple. I'm not sure how that's going to affect the lighting in the tunnel. Let's go to the layout view. Let's see, let's drag back here. Let's click play. So the frame rate is slowed right down, right? Because we're using volumetric lighting now. Let's just pause it here. I think it looks all okay in here. Let's just render this out. Press F12. Let's just see what it looks like in the render. So we did set our render settings quite high, so this might take a fair bit of time to render, but let's see if we can get this one frame out. Okay, so I think that's going to be okay. And as that rotates, these particles are going to fly off. I think it will look pretty cool. So let's close this. Let's go to File, Save here. Really for now, temporarily, let's set the, we need to set this back afterwards, but let's set the tile size here to 8. And that should improve our viewport. It should in theory. For some reason this thing is still pointing downwards. Why am I upside down here? What's going on here? This we need to drag down, right? To have it underneath the object. Is our camera upside down? I'm not quite sure. Yeah, that needs to be underneath the object. And that is shown from the top. So I think our camera is the other way around. So maybe it was correct in the first place. Let's drag this underneath, and then let's rotate it back around. Rotate 180. I think maybe there's a keyframe in this. Yeah, it looks like there's okay. I know what's going on. So basically, when we added this rotation the first time around, there was a keyframe here, and once there's a keyframe in the timeline, if the record button is not active, it's going to default back to that keyframe. So we need to right click on this keyframe. Let's see, and delete this keyframe. Now when we rotate it, you'll see that there's no color in here, and we can rotate it 180, and now it will face up, and then when we move across our timeline it will stay facing up. That's what was a bit confusing there. Let's press 0. Now we can see the lighting here properly, the way we was expecting it to be. It was a little bit confusing, but we got there in the end. I'm wondering what it will look like. Okay, so I think that's going to be pretty good for our particle settings. I know that we had to do a lot of experimenting. That's what Blend is about sometimes, right? You've got to experiment. You can like change the lighting here. Maybe have it quite wide will look pretty cool as well, right? Like this. I think that actually looks very good. Yeah, I like that, and it's actually casting some lights over here as well. So maybe we'll leave it like that. I think these particles need a bit of a boost. So let's click on the first particle. Let's go to its material and let's try and make them brighter. Let's set them to like around 50 and click on the other one and set that to 50. It's quite far from the camera, so they're getting a little overpowered by this object, but we can see the volumetric lighting working now. We've got these shadows being casted off with this lighting. I think that's going to look very, very cool. Yeah, so I think that's pretty good. Let's go to file, save as. Let's save it as version 9. And I think we're pretty much done. We could add some text in this. We could have some text objects. I've done plenty of text tutorials before, so I guess you could check some of them out if you want to work out maybe how to add some text into here and animate some text. But I think for this sci-fi thing, I think this is pretty cool. And the last thing we want to do is let's see, let's go to our on frame 280. That's where our animation is going to stop, right? So let's move to frame 300. Let's click on our camera. Let's hit the record button. And really what we want to do is get to frame, I reckon around frame 240 would be wise. So on frame 240, let's click on the context object here. Let's press I for the location and I for the rotation here. So let's set them static. And on this frame here, maybe we need a bit of movement, right? So let's maybe move it slightly down. And let's rotate our camera slightly, so there's just some sort of movement here rather than it being very static. And on frame 300 we're going to rotate this camera. Let's not rotate it this way, let's rotate on the Y to something like this, and we're going to fly through this object to the other side to a black frame over here. Like this. I think we're about done. The only thing I want to do is really move this volumetric lighting down a little bit, because it's kind of sitting here on the camera frame. I want it to be out of the camera frame. So let's click on the spotlight. Got the move tool selected, and it's a little bit hard to see in here, but I think we could widen it out so it covers all of it, but kind of like the angle here. Let's just middle mouse click out of here and we'll drag it down a bit, just a little bit, press 0. Now it's sitting right outside the camera frame. Let's go back to the first frame, untick the record button, let's give it one quick play. I think we're good. That's it. Job done. You can normally turn off your overlays while you're watching this, so you'll be able to see things a bit better. and that's down for you to go and experiment. Even after that, after this frame 300, it goes to a black frame, right? So after that, you could do something else. You could have some text object appear, you could do whatever you want. It's entirely your choice. So you could have another tunnel on the other side and fly through that one if you like. It's entirely your choice. I'll leave you to go and experiment with that. I'm going to render this out, and then we can check what this render looks like as a little video clip. So we've got 300 frames, so that's going to take a bit of time to render. Let me show you how that's done. Let's go to frame 1. Let's go to file save, and what we must remember to do is what we'll actually do is go to the render settings here, and normally you set the tile settings to 2, but 2 is going to take quite some time to render, so I'm going to set it to 4, and I'm going to just reduce my sample rates to 96, so that will render out a frame a bit quicker. So let's move to like frame let's move to that frame 180 and press F12, and this frame should render a lot quicker than the previous one. So you can see it's rendered already, right? But the quality won't be as good. One thing I might want to try and do, if you go back to this shading here, and in this world setting, so make sure the world setting is selected, you can adjust this slightly, this option down here. You can have it really bright, but I think if you adjust it just right, you get like these sort of rays coming out, like where it's like shadows being casted off of this light source, right? So if you get this just right, you can experiment with this. You can set it to like 0.010, and you'll get these like different types of rays coming out. Normally I set it to 0.015, that's kind of the number, or 0.020, something like this, and you'll get these nice effects sort of shining off these shadows, right? So let's click layout. I think that will look pretty good. Let's go back to frame 1. Let's go to file, save. Let's go to the output settings, and in the output settings we want to set it to AVI JPEG here, and we'll leave it at 90% RGB. Let's click open here. Let's go to my desktop. We'll click inside here, and we'll click accept. And now all we've got to do is press Control and F12, and Blender will go and render out each individual frame, and then we can check what this looks like at the end. So I'll pause the video here, and we'll come back and check the render once it's done. Okay, so just a quick note, I started to bake the or started to render out this animation sequence. I could see the particles weren't being emitted. So there's one thing we need to make sure we do is go to the Ico Sphere emitter, go to the particle settings, the context here, particles, and make sure we apply a cache. So we need to click bake all dynamics, and we need to make sure we bake these frames for the particles, otherwise they won't display in the final render, you just won't see them. So I'm going to go ahead and re-render this. So all I've done is gone to the Ico Sphere emitter and make sure I click bake all dynamics. You see this red line, this is the red line representing the particles. Let's go to file save, and we'll press Control F12 again. Hopefully you haven't rendered, hopefully you watched this part of the video and you didn't render out all your frames without baking them first, the particles, and now it should render out fine with the particles being emitted as well. Okay, so Blender's finished rendering out all of our 300 frames. Let's close this down and go to file save, and let's just go back to our first frame, and we'll minimize this. And inside the folder on my desktop here, we've got this folder, we've got this AVI file. Let's load that up, and we'll watch this. We'll just set it on repeat for a few times, and we'll see if there's anything in here that we want to fix. So I think most of this is looking pretty good. I don't know what you think. I can see there's a bit of something funny going on at the very end of the render. But probably would edit that out in post-production. So we took this into Magic's Movie Edit Pro or DaVinci Resolve, we'll be able to cut out any sort of funny frames at the end, maybe do something else, you know. So overall I'm quite happy with everything. I would say right down towards the end here we've got this, when we zoom into this object it looks all fine here, and I'll probably cut it out on this frame here, because after this frame you'll see like these shadows and stuff and all this crazy stuff going on. We don't really want that, so I'll probably just cut it on this frame, this black frame right here. So I'll take that into some sort of editing software, video editing software, and cut it here and just get rid of this end part, and that's what I would probably do. Let's close this and let's close this. Overall I'm quite happy with how that all turned out. So I don't know what you think. Hopefully you've made something nice as well. If you want to share that with me, you can share that on Instagram. So if you make something similar, share it with me on Facebook. I'll add it to my Facebook page. Share it with me on Instagram, or add a link in the YouTube description. Show me what you've done, and go and make your own version of this. When you get to this black frame here, after it's past this object, you can put your logo there or do something else afterwards. Go and experiment with this. The main objective was to create this tunnel, so we did that, and then we had this particle sort of simulation going on at the end. So I'll be very interested to see what you do. How would I improve this? Probably on this start position here. As we're flying towards this tunnel, I'll probably rotate the camera and then rotate it straight. So I'll have it at some sort of rotation at the beginning, and then sort of rotate towards this object, but at an angle, right? So that might look pretty cool. Just as we rotate at the end, when we fly through this, we rotate the camera here. We could rotate at the beginning as well. Apart from that, I'm very happy with it. Let's have a quick, let's just save this, and let's have one more quick look at it. Let's close this down. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. So I'll leave you to go and experiment. I hope you find this tutorial interesting. It's quite different, and we did a lot of modeling in this tutorial. Normally we just focus on sort of text animation and particle simulations, but I thought it'd be nice to do something, model something different, and I might do a few more tutorials like that. So if you like this, give it a thumbs up, and I'll make more things like this. That's the end of this tutorial. I look forward to seeing you on the next DCP web tutorial.